So I have a question today called without 10. So we want to return a version of the given array where all the 10s have been removed and sort of the remaining elements should shift towards the start of the array, and the empty spaces at the end should be 0. So you can see here that we have an array of numbers, and each 10 in the corresponding array that we are expected to return has been set to 0, but of course the numbers which are not 10 have sort of been dragged towards the left of the array. All of the other elements in the array have been set to 0. So in order to do something like this, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open IntelliJ and actually do it here just to make things a little more clear. I mean, I know that the CodingBat editor can sometimes be a little too small to explain things in some sense. So I am going to do this two ways. The first way is going to be the inefficient, longer way, and the second way is going to be a little more to the point. So for the first, so let's just suppose that we had an integer array called nums, and nums was essentially equal to, let's say, 3, 2, 5, 10, and 2. So naturally what we would expect is that, actually let me put 2 10s in here. Naturally what we'd expect is that we'd return an array which is going to essentially consist of the numbers that we had in the original nums array, but all the 10s would be removed, and all the numbers would be sort of dragged towards the right of the array, the left of the array rather, and those empty spaces that we would have would be set to 0. As you can see, that seems to be the case in the array that I have sort of drew up here. So this new array that I'm talking about, it's going to be called new array, or I could call it, let's see, yeah, let me just go call it new array, and that could be equal to, well, if you think about it, so the array that I originally have will essentially be the same length of the array that I want to produce, just because I'm moving all the numbers to the left of the array, or because the 10s become zeros doesn't mean I have more or less elements. In fact, I have the same amount of elements. So I know that a good way here to say that, to sort of summarize this would be to say that I would have nums.length number of elements. I'll always have the number of elements which are sort of in the new array. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. I'm going to have 5 elements in the corresponding array that I form. So first I'm going to use a for loop which will remove the 10s from the array. So here I'll use a for loop, and essentially what this will do is it will essentially remove all the 10s from the original nums array. So if at all I sense a 10 in the nums array, then I'll set that that number, whichever number it was on any given iteration, I'll set that equal to 0. So by now, after this iteration is done from here to here, all the elements in the nums array, which are 10, have been set to 0. So in other words, you can think of it by now, after this has sort of concluded, the array that I originally had is now just 3, 2, 0, 0, 2, because again, all those elements that I had in the array, which were 10, are sort of set to 0. So now the question is, how do we move all those numbers and sort of shift them over to the left of the array? And I'm going to make another for loop to do that, essentially. And what I'm going to do here is, well, I realized that I want to be able to say, okay, okay, so I'm iterating through the entire array. If at all I encounter a number which is not 0, then I want to place that into my new array, which is of length 4. So, I'm sorry, which is the same length of the nums array. So here you can think of this as being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes, nums.length, because it's the length of the new array is essentially equal to the length of nums.length. And of course, the default values are 0. So we're sort of leveraging that fact to help us out here. So here, as I iterate through the array, I'll say, okay, if it's not a 0, then I want to place it in new in this array that I have called new array. But if it is a 0, then I'll just sort of keep it where it is. And eventually, after it's all said and done, I should have an array which has sort of moved all those elements to the right. Now, I can't just do if not. So if any given number referenced by its index is greater than 0, then I know it's not 0. And so if that happens to be the case, then I am just simply going to say, okay, well, new array at I is going to be nums at I. What's the problem with this? The problem is that new array at I is equal to nums at I. All that's doing is it's taking every single element. So on the first iteration, both i's are 0. And so now we're suddenly referencing the first element, which is referenced by the 0th index, and we are placing inside it nums, or rather what is the first element referenced by the first index, which is 0 for the nums array. So we're just placing all these numbers, which we have in the nums array, into the new array, and it doesn't really do anything. And I'll sort of show you that here. So I have 4 int I is equal to 0, and this is just so that I can print out, just so I can actually print out the contents of new array, so that you can see it should sort of just resemble what we had. Whoa, that's probably not a good thing. What's going on? Well, let's sort of do some troubleshooting here. So new array of I is what I should be saying. So let's actually go ahead and see where we went wrong. We know up until this point, we were sort of, we should have been right up until this point. So at this point here, we had 322. So we should have had this, right? Because we've set, essentially we've set those elements equal to, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to print out nums of I. And so that this should have sort of give me whether or not I've actually done this part of the code, which it seems like I have. So up until right now, it seems like we're pretty much in the clear. And let's just get rid of this. So we know that at this point, line 21, we know that we have sort of accomplished what we want as far as getting those 10s out of the way. But then moving on, we want to be able to say, okay, go ahead and iterate for length such that I is less than nums.length. And we're going to have a variable called index that's going to equal to 0. And new array, so essentially if at all any given element in the nums array is greater than 0, then in that case, we would want to take new array and start it at a particular index, which is of course 0. And so we're starting from the first index of the new array, and we are sort of shoving in that index whatever we find in nums.I, which would of course be a number greater than 0, because if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be inside this if condition. So now if we were to sort of revisit printing that out, you should see that we have we've got a favorable outcome here. Probably not. It doesn't look like it, does it? Let's see here. I think it's because we were doing a double print. We were doing a print here as well. Yeah. Despite that fact, it seems like we're not doing too well of a job here. If of course it's greater, if nums of I is greater than 0, then and only then would we want to take the 0th index. And then, yeah, I think we want to also increment by 1, just because we want to shift and move onwards to the next element of new array and actually populate that with whatever valid number we acquire for nums of I, which is in fact not equal to 10. And then you'll see that we actually get our desired output, which is 32202 or 32200. And so you'll sort of see here that that for any given number, we could have 5, 10, 4, 10, right? It doesn't really matter. We'll get a favorable outcome here. So we're going to move all those numbers to the left of the array. And instead of doing this horizontally, just to show you a better picture of exactly what we're doing, I guess I can show you it like this. We've taken all those numbers and we've shifted them to the left of the array, and we've filled in those missing spaces with zeros. So that's really just one solution, right? Another solution could be that instead of using for loops or 3 for loops, 2 for loops or whatnot, if we were to sort of say, okay, well, int I is equal to 0, I should be less than nums.length, increment I by 1. What we'll do here in this case is we'll say, okay, well, if nums of I is not equal to 10, then it's safe to copy the elements into new array. If that particular nums of I, if that element referenced by that index, if any given element through any given iteration is essentially not equal to 10, then I can take my new array and I'll start that at well, I can't start that at I, right? Because I want to start it at int index equals 0. That's going to be a different number. It's going to start its count from 0, so that we're actually working from the beginning of new array upwards. So we'll say, okay, if nums of I does not equal 10, then and only then will we start populating index. Will we start populating the new array? And so this index thing that we have here, that's sort of just to keep track of where we are in the new array as we validly populate the new array with valid nums of i's, so to speak. So in other words, if nums of I does in fact equal to 10, then we're just not going to we're essentially just not going to populate new array with nums of I. And of course, in order to keep track of where we are, or after we've populated one index with the number, we want to increment index by 1 so that we can actually move on to the next index, and therefore we'd be populating a new index the next time we come in here, or in this if statement rather. And of course, if we are in here, then we would know that we want to in fact populate sort of another index, so to speak. So when we run this here, well, we're not going to get anything now, right? Because we actually haven't printed anything out. But if we were to do that, if we were to print something out, int I is equal to 0, I should be less than nums.length plus, and then print out new array I. And you'll see that we more or less get the same outcome. And in fact, we get exactly the same outcome. And if we sort of change around the numbers here, you see we get pretty much what we want. And another thing is this entire for loop here is just to actually print out the values. Otherwise, our code pretty much ends here, right here. So if we were to actually go ahead and take this into CodingBat, and we were just to sort of copy paste this out, you'll see that we're missing a return statement because we're not actually printing them out as we were with IntelliJ. Here we just want to return new array, which would of course consist of the values that we want, and we get all greens, top, bottom. Another thing that I want to sort of reinforce here is that the array has in fact not been modified. A new array has been created, which only takes the numbers which are essentially not equal to 10. And for every number which was equal to 10, it just has a default value of 0 in the new array. So like I've created nums.length. I've created it. So let me just take a pretty simple example here. I have 3 elements in this array, okay? And if I have 3 elements, that means I have 3 boxes. Is that cool? And then I create a new array called, well, I create a new array called new array. And that itself has 3 boxes because the length, the brackets that we have here actually defines the length of the array. And these brackets, I mean, these boxes that we have here, I mean, they aren't empty. I mean, they have zeros in them for their default values, sort of. And so for here, if these numbers were, let's say 2, or in this case, let's say they are 3, 2, and 10, right? New array, I mean, the new array just has a bunch of zeros. But as we go through this process, it says, okay, if nums of I does not equal to 10, so it's iterating through nums of I, which is this array here. And it goes through, it says, okay, it's not equal to 10, then go ahead and place new array of index, which is starting at 0, so we're here, and place that element in that box. And so it places 3 in that box, and then we come back again, and then it increments index by 1, so that the next time we come here, between these two, inside this if statement, we know that we want to populate another index. And so we've already incremented the value of index the last time we were here, so that the next time we come back, which is now, we know that we're going to reference a different index, the next index, which is going to reference sort of the next element, which is going to populate the next element. So we come back here again, and so we're here now, and we say, okay, if nums of I does not equal to 10, and of course, we're still iterating through the nums array. And here, of course, it's not equal to 10, so we set that to 2. Okay. And then we come back again, we say, okay, and of course, index is incremented, so now index is equal to 3. But then we say, okay, if nums of I does not equal to 10, well, it does equal to 10. And so what do? We just completely break out, and then we return new array. So you'll see here that we actually, even though we haven't finished populating each element in the array, we still have, in fact, the right answer, because everything that we haven't populated is by default a value of 0. So this is a very tricky question, in my opinion, how it's phrased, but the goal is to really implicitly understand things instead of sort of expecting that things will be explicitly stated. So this is sort of a takeaway here, a very important takeaway in my opinion.